Is this on?
It is on.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us. Bitcoin Magazine, BTC Media, excellent conference. So many exciting speakers. So we're very honored to be here today.
We sure are. Yeah, good crowd.
My name is Pierre Rochard. I'm the Vice President of Research at Riot Platforms, and
I'm Morgen Rochard. I am a financial planner at my company, Origin Wealth Advisors. I'm also a Bitcoin consultant at my firm, Money Owners. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Bitcoin, financial planning, and how to do it.
Okay, so the last panel got everyone super bullish. They were talking about Bitcoin going to $1 million. We get a lot of criticism in the Bitcoin community of pump and dump or being accused of speculation. How do Bitcoiners go from just speculating on get rich quick to actually using Bitcoin as part of their financial plan responsibly?
Yeah, I love that question. So it all starts with your life plan. And people often don't like to hear that because what I often hear from Bitcoiners is, Bitcoin is my financial plan. I don't need somebody like you and I don't need a financial plan. I've got Bitcoin. Bitcoin's going to save me. And the thing is that while Bitcoin is going to help, for sure, and that's why we're all here, and it is a savings technology that will provide you with long-term savings in the future, which is great, you need to know why you're doing that, right? We don't just stack money for the sake of having money. We don't want to just continually have money and live in this life where money is the most important thing rather than what we're doing in life. And it's important to live your life with meaning and purpose and find a way to be fulfilled. And money weaves into that, but money isn't that. And I would say for everyone here in the audience, my best hope for you is that you find something that's meaningful and fulfilling in your life and a reason to have Bitcoin rather than Bitcoin being the reason why you're here. And so when you start from that perspective, you have to start with what would be my most fulfilled life? What would be fulfilling for me? And how am I going to achieve that?
And you've got, how many clients does Origin Wealth Advisors have? How many families do you work with?
Yeah, we currently work with 44 families, and it's a privilege, honestly, for me. So when I first started my career, I was a trader. I was actually yelling in a pit on the American Stock Exchange back when that was still a thing. And there is not so much meaning and purpose when you're just yelling and moving numbers around, whereas personal finance is very human. It's personal. And so I'm able to connect with people and to make a difference in people's lives. And most importantly, people are able to make changes in their own lives so that they are living both comfortably and living responsibly, but also living with intention.
So when you're talking with people and they're telling you about what their most fulfilled life, what are examples of what they see as their most fulfilled life?
Yeah, so there are 5 major categories that always come up for people. The first is family. People, they want to have a family or they already have a family and they want to provide for that family, or they have extended family that are really important to them. The second is their community. Who's around them? How are they interacting with that community? How are they helping that community? What are they doing to make that community a better place? The third thing is creativity, and we often think of that as maybe work, but I think it's work plus other aspects of somebody's life where they could be creative. Bitcoin is a great way to be creative, right? Coming in here, this is totally new money, right? It's completely creative, and so I think that a lot of people have found meaning, purpose in that. There's also spirituality. So for a lot of people, myself included, I believe that there's one creator who has given us a specific role in our lives, and that we are here to find what that role is and make the world a better place. And so for spirituality is very important to people and often comes up in their life plan. And the last thing is, what's our place in the world? Where am I supposed to be? What am I supposed to be doing? And all of these, they do require money, right? We can't just, exist without needing food and shelter and water and basic needs and clothing, right? And then also we have other things that we want to do, elements of our life that are important to us that money needs to pay for. And so money weaves into all 5 of these categories and creates somebody's life plan.
So I didn't hear day trading leveraged Bitcoin in that list of fulfilled. So the gambling is not typically part of that?
I've never had anyone come into my office and say, I love going to the roulette table, taking all of my life savings and then putting it on black and waiting to see what's going to happen. I often don't hear that. I've also never heard, I'd love to be so leveraged that I'm sweating bullets at night, I could barely sleep, and I sometimes vomit.
So if somebody's using Bitcoin as long-term savings, as their personal treasury reserve asset, how does that fit into this life planning component?
Yeah, so there are short-term things that we want to do in life, and then there are longer-term things that we want to do in life. And so it's really going to be very dependent on anybody's specific situation, like what's going to be short-term versus what will be long-term. But for instance, right, if you want to start a family, that might be a short-term thing where you might need a little extra cash around. Whereas if you are looking to, let's say, provide for that child that you've now had in the future, and you want to pay for schooling or whatever else it is, or you want to help them fund a business down the line, right, that would be long-term planning. You might want to change careers, that would be short-term planning, or you might want to fund your retirement, that would be long-term planning. There are many aspects to people's lives that require short-term, right, fiat cash, where fiat actually would be the right appropriate instrument to use, and then longer-term, where Bitcoin, the long-term savings technology, would come into play. And I would say in anybody's life, they're always going to have a combination of both. Whether you're 18 years old or you're 99 years old, there's always going to be a reason why you have something short-term and why you have something long-term.
Okay, now on the long term, how should Bitcoiners think about retirement? Are you going to spend all your Bitcoin in retirement, or how do we think that through?
Yeah, I love that question, and so I'm a little biased, I have to say, on this. There's a concept in finance right now that's called die with zero, and to me, this is a very fiat concept. And it's a very fiat brain, and I don't like it. I don't like it one bit, and I think that we all need to stop thinking die with zero. You own a pristine asset. The reason why you're sitting here and you're at a conference with all these people, and why you're spending all of your time thinking about Bitcoin, and why you listen to probably too many podcasts and read too many books about Bitcoin, is not because you want to end up with zero Bitcoin at the end of your life, right? It's because you think it's a multi-generational asset that can provide for you, your children, your grandchildren's grandchildren, and so forth. It can provide a legacy. It can make a foundation, right? It could help the future of whatever project is important to you. It's not, okay, let's blow it all on a vacation and escape from this life and not find meaning and purpose, right? I think that there's a difference between wanting to take a vacation because you're doing something very purposeful, intentional, and meaningful in your life, and you need a little bit of a break, and you're going to use some of your Bitcoin or some of your fiat to go do that, versus saying that my purpose in life is to escape from life. And so it's not part of Bitcoin's values, and I don't think it should be part of anyone's values, really. And my hope is that with something like Bitcoin, which can be multi-generational, which is a sound hard money, that people can see that and make sure that they don't die with zero.
So multi-generational, this brings up the inheritance issue, and Bitcoiners, we really struggle with how to do inheritance correctly. What are some practical tips from your perspective of having worked with clients on this topic?
Yeah, I would say this is the sticking point for many people, and rightfully so. This, I think, is actually the hardest part of Bitcoin, because it is the asset that we want to be multi-generational, and yet the sticking point in it is that we have this trustless asset that then we have to go be trusting of somebody at some point in our lives. And so you can do that in a multitude of ways, right? The first way is that you have a really trusted family member, or your kids, right? You now have adult kids that you've been able to train up on Bitcoin, and you trust them well enough to be able to actually give them your private keys, right? That would be the first part of the plan, that I hope is something that everybody can do. However, that's not necessarily everybody's situation, in which case you do have to get a third party involved, but the way to get a third party involved responsibility would be to do it through multi-sig. And that way your third party doesn't actually have your keys, right? They just have a key. And through having that key, they can help administer the process of your estate. The other thing that I would mention about it, though, is that, like, one of the things about Bitcoin is that it helps you with privacy, right? The government doesn't necessarily know all the money that you have, as far as if you have something in a cold storage wallet. They do know exactly what's in your Chase bank account, right? And so it's very easy, let's say, to administer your Chase bank account, but it's not as easy, let's say, to administer the hardware wallet. And so when we're planning with these things, right, we want to make sure, though, that we're still planning on reality's terms. And so what I often hear from Bitcoiners is, well, they don't know about it, so I'll just toss it to my relative, and then I'll die. And I don't think that that's necessarily a good plan. Well, my hope is that you get to toss it, right? But what if you don't, right? In which case you do need to involve people where it's necessary. And also you might want to create a trust depending on how much Bitcoin you have, in order to preserve that privacy that you've tried so hard to create. The trust is very, very important depending on what state you live in. Some states have a very public probate process, in which case the address at which you store your Bitcoin and the amount of Bitcoin, therefore, might become public upon your death and then be associated with you and your family. I think that for most Bitcoiners, that would be a nightmare. For some people, they don't care so much. For others, though, right, if just by creating a trust, you can avoid that process. You can avoid probate. Your assets can pass to the next generation without, anybody being the wiser. And this is not, me saying only do this if you're doing nefarious things. No, this is just a basic right that we should all have privacy and that it shouldn't be a public thing how much money people have.
So, okay, before you get to inheritance, you've got to accumulate these Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And that can be challenging for folks as well. How do you accumulate Bitcoin over time? And should you do things like, well, obviously you should sell your chairs, but should you also take out a mortgage?
You can sell these couches. They look, quite expensive. Now, so I would say this, right? Leverage is a very difficult position to be in. I've seen this with clients. I've seen this with other people who have come to me and asked opinions about it who have not been clients. When you're over leveraging up unnecessarily because you have this future price expectation for Bitcoin, right? You might be right? We're all here because we do think that in the future Bitcoin will be higher than it is today. However, you might not be right on the timing. We don't necessarily know how long it's going to take for Bitcoin to moon, right? In which case, along the way, you're either paying the cost of the loan to do so, or, worse, when Bitcoin is hyper volatile or you're in that situation, you get sold out of your Bitcoin. You actually have less than what you started with. So I would say, no, if you're going to take out a mortgage because you want to go buy a home and it's appropriate for your financial situation, rather than taking out a mortgage or cash out refinancing because you want to go buy Bitcoin. The best way to accumulate Bitcoin is to have some income and have expenses that are less than your Bitcoin. Have expenses that are less than your income, and then you have a cushion that's known as savings, right? And then you could take that savings and, depending on your situation, you can go buy some Bitcoin with it. That, I say, is the best way to accumulate Bitcoin over time. The problem with that is that that's hard. People don't like to do that. People don't like to cut their expenses. They like to grow their expenses. So, especially when you get a raise at your job, you're like, I got a raise. Okay, I'm taking everybody. Yeah, we're going on vacation. You spent your raise 18 times over, and now you're, doing cash out refinancing on your mortgage so that you can have some Bitcoin. So, what I would say is that you have to do the hard work, and the hard work really is to evaluate what is coming in and what is going out. And the going out portion of it is, I would say, just as important, if not more important, than what is coming in. I see this with people all the time. People who often look very wealthy on the outside may have nothing that they've saved because they actually have spent it all, and that's why they look so wealthy. And the person who's just, the average person who's driving an old car, has old shoes, maybe should wash their car a little bit more than they do, right? They're the person that actually has $10 million. So, I mean, it's hard to know who has what. But I would say if you want to put yourself in the best situation, you need to be saving at least 20% of your pre-tax income. That's just a rule of thumb, and you're going to be okay.
That's great. Now, if you're in a position where you're into Bitcoin but your spouse is not, and you've put on the Michael Saylor podcast while on long road trips, she put in or he put in earplugs, didn't listen. How do you really convince or indoctrinate your spouse into going 100% Bitcoin?
Okay, well, the first thing you do is you turn on the Bitcoin for Advisors podcast. No, I'm just kidding. So I would start with listening to your spouse. I know this is the hardest thing for people to do because I think that we all, when we know a lot about Bitcoin, we want to share that with everybody. And I'm guilty of that too. So I want to tell everybody about it all the time. It's all you want to talk about. It's all you're listening to. And we assume that everybody else around us also wants to do that. And for some people, they might actually come around to Bitcoin, but they don't want to be doing it 24/7. I know it's hard to believe, but it's actually true. In which case, I would say don't talk at your spouse, right? Like, talk with your spouse. And talking with somebody actually requires that you have a listening ear. And that's actually going to be the best way to do it, rather than just blasting podcasts all the time and telling them about how you're right and, everybody else is wrong and this is the best asset. There is no second best, right? 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin. You can keep going on and on. There's lots and lots of memes that you could put on your spouse, but maybe let your spouse do some of it back, I would say, is going to be a great place to start. And then the other thing I would say is getting involved. So once you're listening and your spouse you both have each other's ear, you're on the same team, right? you're doing this together, and remember that. And so if you're on the same team, you have to come up with the allocation that makes sense for you as a team, rather than, okay, like my wife will thank me later is often what I hear. And your wife may thank you later, but she might not be there later, right? Like, I mean, depending on how you do it, I don't know. I think it might be more important to preserve the sanctity of your marriage rather than trying to beat somebody over the head with Bitcoin. The last thing I would say is I actually want to turn it over to you because I like this concept that you have about Bitcoin having having just a neutral expected value and what that means, because I think that talking about some of that, some of like the core base of Bitcoin can really be helpful. So
yeah, absolutely. So you'll have people say Bitcoin is speculative, and really what they're trying to get at is that it's gambling. It's going to the casino, and thus it has a negative expected value, that ultimately there will be winners and losers, and there will be more losers than winners. And that's a criticism that people level against Bitcoin. And part of that comes from Bitcoin's price volatility, right? They look at the chart, okay, we're not at the all-time high, and therefore people have lost money. But really what I think that people are missing is beyond just the financial layer of Bitcoin where it interfaces with the fiat system, you have the technical layer of Bitcoin, the engineering layer, and that does not have a positive or negative expected value. That is the UTXO set, and that's really, the mean 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin. I think that's where the rubber hits the road of 1 Bitcoin is a fixed percentage of the total possible diluted supply of Bitcoin. And therefore, if you buy 1 Bitcoin, if you just look at it in a vacuum, and you've got it in cold storage and it's all locked away, you don't have a cost of carry, right? It doesn't cost you anything to hold that Bitcoin, and therefore it doesn't have a negative expected value. It doesn't have a positive expected value either. It's just this pure savings vehicle, and that's where I think that a lot of the criticisms of Bitcoin, they're just looking at the price chart. They aren't looking at the fundamental engineering of the system.
So once your wife's ears are open, then you can explain that concept to her rather than just beating her over the head with something else that Pierre Rochard has said.
Yeah. So another question I had for you. Okay, so somehow you've convinced your spouse by listening to her feelings, all that, that you're going to buy Bitcoin. And you found a lot of expenses to cut. We're not buying shoes anymore. We're not buying purses anymore.
Not buying tools anymore.
Okay. Yeah, that's an investment.
We're not buying mulch anymore.
Mulch is a very good investment as well. That's how you keep things growing. But do you go take a look at the price chart? Do you try to time the market? We're at the beginning of the cycle here. It's now a good time to buy, or should you wait until the dip?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite questions, and this is one of the questions we get most frequently in my practice is, okay, so what I'm going to do, right, is I'm going to time the 4-year cycle, and we're going to be selling all the way up, and then we're going to wait until it crashes, and then we're going to start buying back in, and you're going to help me, right, because we're going to start with this amount of Bitcoin, and by the end, I've done all the calculations, we'll actually double our Bitcoin stack, and that's what you do, right? You're a financial advisor. And no, that's not what we do. So what I want to tell people is this. Whether you're in the Bitcoin world or you're in the fiat world, the best time to buy Bitcoin is when you have the money to do so. And the best time to sell your Bitcoin is when you have an expense that you plan for and you need the money. And so, right, because it's a long-term savings vehicle, that's why I'm saying an expense that you planned for. Bitcoin is not something that you would use, okay, my car broke down, I now need a new car engine, I didn't expect that, and I'm going to go sell my Bitcoin. That's not what Bitcoin is there for. Bitcoin is a long-term savings technology. And therefore, it's really, really important that people actually have a fiat reserve for something like that to come up. That way, they don't have to sell at the worst possible time. More often than not, what happens when we try to time the market is that we actually are really bad market timers, unfortunately. I wish that I was a great market timer. I probably wouldn't be, sitting here on this stage talking about financial planning. I'd just be at home, trading. Except that I was a trader in a previous life, and even for professional traders, it's very, very, very difficult to do so. And that's why, lots of firms go out of business, and why there's only, the really ultra professional, high frequency traders that are still out there today that are really using computer programming to do it, not human minds. And so I think it's really easy to look at a chart of the past and say, oh, of course I would have bought here and sold there. It's so obvious. Even my 5-year-old can do this. Except that we don't actually know what the chart is going to look like in the future. So I highly, highly encourage people to always save money when they can, and then use that money when it's time.
How much, okay, and this is the most controversial topic to talk about at a Bitcoin conference. How much fiat reserve should someone have on their balance sheet?
Yeah, so this is a question I really like. And so, I mean, I think for most people, right, 100% Bitcoin is maybe not appropriate. And I know everyone's going to start booing. Okay, send hate mail. But most people, everybody does. Everybody needs some sort of fiat emergency reserve. And whether that is, only 3 months worth of expenses because you like living fast and loose, or it's something more like 6 months worth of expenses, that's going to depend on your risk tolerance and your time horizon. And that's actual cash. I'm not talking about what people are doing nowadays, which is considering the S&P 500 their savings account, right? I'm talking about, fiat, melting cash in a bank account that's, earning a 4% yield or whatever it is these days, right? You do need that. Unfortunately, we all do need that, right? Because we can't use things that are long-term assets to pay for short-term expenses. That's just the way that it is. And so the best way to bulletproof your plan is by having a good emergency reserve in place. After that, your asset allocation is going to be really dependent on what you want to do, right? For some people, fine, maybe 100% Bitcoin is appropriate. For most people, though, I would say it's probably, it's still a little aggressive. And what we've been finding for a lot of our clients is that somewhere really in the 20 to 50% range is where people are falling, especially if they, they have a long time horizon, they have a high risk tolerance, they have a high ability and willingness to take risk, and they understand the technology. And so when Bitcoin goes down, right, they're not immediately looking for the door. You need to have all of these things in order to be a long-term holder and to have these sizable positions. And if you don't have that, then I would say, probably somewhere 10% or below is going to be more appropriate.
And then it increases, right? So as the Bitcoin price goes up, that percentage increases. What do you tell people about rebalancing, where maybe they were comfortable with 10% of their portfolio in Bitcoin, but now it's 50% just because we had a big cycle?
Yeah, so I think the other thing, and this kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about not dying with zero, is that because Bitcoin is the asset that it is, and that we are hoping that in the future it is a global monetary reserve currency, right? I mean, that's why we're all here. And so I think it's less about rebalancing and more about thinking about it in Bitcoin terms. And so for some people, rebalancing is obviously going to be appropriate given their situation and their risk tolerance and everything else. For other people, though, it's actually just going to be about, okay, how much Bitcoin do I actually need? Not how much Bitcoin in fiat terms do I need, right? That's a very fiat way of thinking about it, of looking at our portfolio with the unit of count at being US dollars all the time or whatever fiat currency that you're in. If you're constantly evaluating what Bitcoin is in terms of fiat, then you're not really evaluating Bitcoin as it's meant to be. And so, if we're rebalancing in dollar terms, now we end up with less Bitcoin than we otherwise would have had, and maybe that's not necessarily appropriate for somebody's situation. And so I would say that it's the same thing with any kind of planning, is that I think switching between USD and also Bitcoin as your unit of account to really evaluate what's important to you and what matches your life plan is going to be the most appropriate for people. And so for a lot of people, that's going to mean when you don't rebalance because you have the right number. And for other people, when you're evaluating it, you might say, actually, you know what, maybe I do have a little bit too much Bitcoin. I'm going to take some off the table.
Excellent. Well, where can people find you on social media?
So I am at Morgen with an E Rochard. My financial planning practice is Origin Wealth Advisors. You can find us at originwa.com. And I also have my consulting practice, which you can find at moneyowners.com.
Awesome. And you can find me at Bitcoin Pierre. And we co-host a podcast together, Bitcoin for Advisors.
Yeah, we get that out monthly.
Usually monthly.
Yeah,
yes.
Usually monthly. This is the live Bitcoin for Advisors podcast here, so thanks for joining us. And we hope to put one out next month.
Thank y'all.
Morgen and Pierre Rochard, thank you very much.